Alrighty, well, today we're going to talk about a really cool combination of some more biochemistry. But the really exciting thing that we're doing today is we're going to be involving not only pathways and diseases, but also the pharmacology and how to combat some of these diseases. That's super exciting because I've never taken pharmacology, so I'm kind of going off the cusp here. But I'm excited, and if I mispronounce anything, I'm sorry. That's what happens when you learn stuff online, I guess, and self-teach stuff. So let's get rolling. So today we're going to be talking all about lipids, what lipids are, how they're digested, how they are stored, how are they released into the bloodstream, their importance, their significance, the diseases that come along with excess amounts of lipids either being produced or stored, and as well as drugs in the modern day era that we use to combat excessive amount of lipids in your body. Just like all things, you've probably heard the term like moderation in all things. Our body's the same way. There's a certain level that we call homeostasis where we would like something to be. It's the same with like what we talked about last time with glycogen. It's the exact same thing with lipids. There's a certain amount of lipids that we should be consuming and kind of circulating in our bloodstream. Too much of that, either because of a malfunction in your body or because of dietary decisions, can have a severe impact on long term health. We see obviously that in the United States a lot with both glucose, which we talked about last weekend, and lipids. So, what is a lipid? Lipids are fats. What are fats? Fats are long chains of carbon, and I can kind of draw up for you. But yeah, there's just kind of these long chains of carbon that are built slightly differently. While glucose was those hexagon shapes, these are just like long chains, as you kind of see here. Um, there's different types of fats. There's something called an essential fat, which is important to talk about a little bit. An essential fat, essential meaning you need it, right? Essential in this case means that you cannot produce it, so you need to consume it. There's two types of essential fats. Well, there's more than two, but the two main ones are omega 3s and omega 6s, which you've probably heard of like fish oil, or which is what omega 3s are. Our bodies need equal parts omega 6s and omega 3s to function at a high level, and we have to consume both. A cool little tidbit fun fact is the American diet produces and has people consuming a lot of omega 6s. And because we need 50-50 and we're over consuming omega 6s, oftentimes people will supplement fish oil, which has a lot of omega 3s. Both of these are really important for our nervous system and brain health. The thing about vitamins in general, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, is that there's a lot of research that uh, can or uh, support or hurt the case of vitamins. In a lot of cases, there isn't a lot of research that actually shows vitamins do much. But actually, in the case of fish oil, there is pretty strong evidence to prove that fish oil is actually a good supplement if you actually have low amounts of something called HDLs. Two other types of fats that I would like to talk about: HDLs and LDLs. So, what does that mean? And we're going to say VLDLs. I'm using all these terms. They're basically these little bubbles filled with fat that are floating around our bloodstream. Some are considered good, some are considered bad. The bad one is considered LPL, which stands for low density lipoprotein. And why that's considered bad, I'll show you in the pathway here, but it has to do with moving fat to the blood. We don't want that because if you have a lot of fat moving towards the blood, that can often cause stuff like atherosclerosis, and it can cause strokes and other problems. HDLs, or high density lipoproteins, remove fat and lipids from the blood and move it to your liver, meaning that it's decreasing the fat content in your blood. That's really good, right? You need both to live, right? We're just talking in case of like modern day health. If there's a definitely a problem with in the United States and in other parts of the world where people are over consuming food, right? And so HDL is considered a good fat content just because this specific fat bubble will take away fat from your blood and bring it to your liver to get processed. So it's getting rid of that fat in the blood. Asclerosis. I can't say that word today. So okay, so let's start with lipid digestion from the very top. So as we consume fats, there's two major types of fats, fatty acids and cholesterol. Those are the two ones I'll be referencing. Fatty acids are those long carbon chains I was talking about. Cholesterol are these four ringed structures. If you take an egg, for instance, eggs have lots of cholesterol. You know, so there's a mix, right? While like olive oil has fatty acids in it. So you're kind of consuming both in your diet. And as they get broken down, they're going to come in contact with your stomach first. The stomach's the first thing that does anything to fats, but it doesn't break them down. It actually just denatures them. So the acidity of your stomach causes the crumpled up long chain of carbons that we talked about. It's actually kind of crumpled up, and the acid causes it to kind of unfold into a long chain. So it's like a yarn ball, basically. So you're basically just unwinding the yarn ball in your stomach with that acid. It's disrupting the structure of the fatty acid. It'll then eventually make it to your duodenum, which is the first part of your small intestine, where it will come in contact with enzymes from your pancreas. Your pancreas is in charge of basically every enzyme that's going to deal with breaking down of just important like glucose, lipids, and proteins. The pancreas helps in some amount in all of those processes. It's going to come in contact with lipase, which is an enzyme that will break down triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. Triglycerides have a glycerol backbone and then 3 fatty acid chains. So it kind of looks like this. I don't know if you can see that little thing. I'll point it out. But yeah, so that back straight line, that's the glycerol and then the 3 fatty acid chains. It's going to break those down. Sometimes it'll just break one off and form a monoglyceride and then 2 fatty acid chains, or it'll just form a glycerol and 3 fatty acid chains. I'm not going to get into all that just because I don't think it's super important. And then cholesterol that we consume will also be coming into the duodenum and coming in contact with cholesterol esterase. And cholesterol esterase, something to know about cholesterol is that it's oftentimes has a ester attached to it. So the cholesterol esterase will move the ester, which is a structure, bring it to the fatty acid glycerol portion, and just bring the straight cholesterol down. And this is an enterocyte, which is the stomach, or the small intestine cells. So it's going to come in contact with a transporter. We're going to talk about cholesterol first, which is NPC1L1. This transporter lets just cholesterol into through the cell membrane, so it's going to cross through, while a bunch of bile, which is released as well. And what bile does is it helps emulsify fat, which means it helps kind of open it up. We talked about that clump, right? So the acid can't get in there to denature it until the bile kind of forms these pockets and holes. So bile is going to work its way in, kind of open up this clump, so then the acidic environment can denature it. So bile emulsifies fat. So consumed with bile, a mixture of bile, fatty acids have been broken down, and glycerol have been broken down by the lipase. Oh, I'm sorry too. I forgot to mention that those holes that the bile's opening up is also where lipase is getting in there and opening it and breaking it down. So lipase would never be able to break down fat, the enzyme produced by our pancreas, unless bile was there. So it's gonna a micelle is gonna be formed outside of the enterocyte, so up here, which is formed of fatty acids, glycerol, and some cholesterol and bile. And this is gonna be this big old blob of stuff. And it's gonna come through because the cell wall is nonpolar, and this blob is nonpolar as well. And it'll come through and enter inside of the enterocyte. So now we've left the whole of the duodenum, and now we're in kind of this space right here of the cells of the small intestine or duodenum. So this micelle is going to get broken up, the cholesterol is going to leave. A process of esterification is going to happen where the fatty acids and the glycerol backbone will actually be recombined back together to form a triglyceride. So we literally took the cholesterol and triglycerides, broke them down, brought them in, and then rebuilt them. This will then get packaged up, the triglycerides and the cholesterol, in a place called the Golgi apparatus of the cell, and it will be packaged up in something called a chylomicron. There's a very important enzyme, MTP, which will produce, I guess it's not an enzyme, but it's going to make, or maybe it is an enzyme. I'm not really sure whether MTP is an enzyme, but MTP is going to make ApoB48. ApoB48 is the thing that you can think about. It's wrapping around, it's the string that's wrapping around and containing this blob of fat. So it's really helping maintain the structure of the chylomicron. It's also really important because that's the receptor that is going to be recognized, right? So it's a string getting wrapped around with these receptors on them, and that receptor is going to be what's recognized to move the stuff. So ApoB48 attaches to the chylomicron. The chylomicron is wrapped up. That's a bunch of cholesterol and triglycerides. So we talked about HDLs, LPLs. We're going to talk about VLDLs, which stands for very light lipoprotein. And we'll also talk about IDLs, which is intermediate density lipoprotein. These are all steps. And how it works is we base it based off of the density is correlated with how much triglycerides there are. So the more triglycerides there are, the less dense it is. So the thing with the most triglycerides is a VLDL, which is a very light, which makes sense because it's very light, right? Density lipoprotein. And then next is going to be your IDL, your intermediate density lipoprotein. Then your LDL, which is going to have even less triglycerides, which is your low density lipoprotein. Then your last is your VLDL, which has the least amount of triglycerides and the most amount of cholesterol. So the more cholesterol, less triglycerides equals more dense. That will be more explained through the process. So we've talked about thus far getting digested, the fats going into the enterocyte. Okay. So this ApoB48, I'm sorry I'm taking all these pauses. I just feel like I need to give more background before I move forward. So this ApoB48 chylomicron is actually going to enter into our lymphatic duct, or into these lymph nodes or these lymph system, and it's going to travel through the lymph system until it leaves your thoracic lymph duct into your subclavian vein. Your subclavian vein will then go through the rest of the body. Your subclavian vein, if you don't know, will feed into your heart eventually, which will then move throughout the rest of your body. Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, your subclavian vein feeds into your superior vena cava, which then goes into your right atrium, which will go through this cycle of the heart. Okay, so now we're going to skip all that and we're just straight up in the blood. So as this chylomicron travels in the blood, it'll come in contact with something called a lipoprotein lipase. This lipoprotein lipase will remove a bunch of triglycerides from it and move it to other places, and then it will come in contact with a ApoE receptor, which will then bring it into your liver. So that ApoE receptor is really important. A couple things I failed to mention is we talked about the ApoB48 receptor receptor. It also, in the process of getting the subclavian vein, also had the ApoE and ApoC2 receptors added as well. The ApoC2 is what binds to the LPL, or the lipoprotein lipase. And so that receptor is important because that's going to be removing those triglycerides. Remember, if we remove triglycerides, it gets more dense. Okay, so this chylomicron will turn into a chylomicron remnant after it gets its triglycerides removed by the lipoprotein lipase. And it will become a chylomicron remnant, bind to the ApoE receptor, and go into the liver. Okay, in the liver, hepatic lipase, hepatic is Latin for liver, it will bind to hepatic lipase will bind to the chylomicron remnant and remove triglycerides and cholesterol. Okay, and it'll break it down completely. So now there's no chylomicron remnant. On another section portion, these triglycerides that were just removed and the cholesterol is just removed from this chylomicron remnant will be rebuilt into a new structure called a VLDL. I've already talked about it a little. It's a very light density lipoprotein. This will then get expedited and pushed out from the liver back into the blood, right? So liver to blood equals bad, okay? So we're moving it into the blood where it's going to come in contact with another LPL or lipoprotein lipoprotein lipase. This will remove more triglycerides, remember, so we're getting more and more dense and less light. So it removes more triglycerides, entering them into fat cells and storage areas through your ApoE and ApoC2 receptors. And from there, it will, once it comes in contact with, after dumping off those LPLs, it'll come in contact with hepatic lipase again in the liver. The hepatic lipase will repackage it all up and form our IDL. Our IDL is our intermediate lipodensity protein, and that will come in contact again with hepatic lipase and form our LDL. Our LDL is the low density lipoprotein. And the final steps of our LDL will be depositing more fat to the cells, and this receptor called our LDLR. Our LDLR is just on the enterocyte portion. So that's just really important to understand that it's kind of going through all these weird steps where it's kind of bouncing back and forth between the liver and the blood and the liver and the blood. And as it does that, it comes in contact with hepatic lipase and lipoprotein lipase. It will be breaking down and removing triglycerides, and then in the liver, it's kind of just getting repackaged. So the liver is kind of like the hub, you can say, of triglycerides and cholesterol, while all these things are going out and delivering fat to new locations. It's kind of like, you can kind of use the analogy of like the UPS system, or like the United States Postal Service, UPSP system. And it's basically, this is like where all the packages get delivered of fat, and then it's getting shot out to all these enterocytes or all these other fat cells that are going to be able to store the fat. Something that our body can do is actually produce cholesterol and produce triglycerides on its own. So the term is called de novo. And that's where in the citric acid cycle, which I haven't talked about yet, I eventually will, the citric acid cycle will produce citrate, which will then change to acetyl-CoA, which will then become HMG-CoA, which will then become malevinate, and malevinate can then be changed into cholesterol. So why is that important? Because if we're not consuming cholesterol, we still need cholesterol to form our hormones. That's another fun fact for you tidbit. All hormones are created from cholesterol. So cholesterol is really important for our body, to regulate our body, to function our body. So if we're not consuming cholesterol, our body can make it from new. And the really important enzyme that we'll talk about later is HMG-CoA reductase. Okay, so that is the whole process of circulating. So just to go through it again, maybe a little more clearly, our chylomicron comes into the bloodstream, comes in contact with lipoprotein lipase, triglycerides are removed, it becomes a chylomicron remnant, where hepatic lipase will digest it in the liver, remember the area, repackage it up into VLDL, ship it back off, very light density lipoprotein. Very light lipo-density protein will come in contact with LPL, lipoprotein lipase, where it will be digested even more and come back in, form IDL, which is your intermediate density lipoprotein, come in contact with hepatic lipase again, forming your LDL, where your LDL will then go deposit fat in other locations and then become a HDL. So, sorry, LDLs don't become HDLs. So what are HDLs? The final thing. HDLs are the final part of the lipoproteins. And the purpose of HDLs is to remove and take away fat in this area and move it back to the liver. And that, why that might be important is for a lot of reasons. Our body always needs a certain amount of liver, or sorry, a certain amount of fats in our liver, and also because if we have excess fat in our liver, in our bloodstream, we want to get it to the liver, the storage area, because excess fat in the blood will always cause problems. Something that is important, an important enzyme called LCAT, is what packages and creates the HDLs, and it's in the bloodstream, and it's taking triglycerides from around and packaging cholesterol and packaging up in these HDLs and then sending them back to home base or the liver. So you can think of like LCAT as the worker loading up the truck. But there's this bad enzyme. It's not really a bad enzyme, but we consider it a bad enzyme in the sense of health and problems that are caused in the modern day era. Same as how we consider LDLs bad and HDLs good. Same exact thing is that this can be a problem causer in a lot of people's diets and health. So LETP is this enzyme that will take triglycerides from your chylomicron and put it into your HDL, as well as take triglycerides from your VLDL and put it in the HDL, making it basically full. So it's like if you built this truck to get rid of these specific packages, but then along the way someone stopped you and loaded up your truck and sent it back. So it's basically making it impossible for the HDLs to go get the fats it needs to get to decrease your fat levels in your blood, if that makes sense. So it's inhibiting your HDLs from doing the job they need to do. Okay. I think I said LETP, it's CETP. Okay, so I've only got 9 more minutes. I thought I could do this all. Turns out this is going to take longer. So maybe it'll be 2 parts to this video. Or maybe not. I got 9 minutes. I think I can do this. So let's now talk about what happens when the triglycerides. So we talked all about LPLs, right, which is lipoprotein lipase, which is removing the triglycerides, right, in the blood. And so let's talk about where are all these triglycerides going, basically, right, and cholesterol. So your LDL comes in contact with your LPL and the LDL receptors, and your GLUT4, which is created when you have insulin release, and your FATPs are going to bring in both glucose and bring in FATP. You're asking, why are you bringing glucose into the equation? Because it's also really important in producing stored fat. So let's say you eat a burger, right? In the bun, there's going to be carbohydrates or glucose, and in the meats, there will be proteins and fats, and then the cheese as well. So as you bring into your LPL receptor, it'll bind to your ApoB100, which is another receptor we're talking about, on the LDL, and it's going to dump off a bunch of triglycerides. And these triglycerides will go through this combination where it will produce fatty acids. It'll be broken down again and produce fatty acids. The fatty acids will then produce broken down into something called acyl-CoA, while the glucose that we consumed is going to form fructose 1,6 biphosphate, bisphosphatase, and then form DHAP and G3P, which, if you don't know, this cycle right here is just part of glycolysis. So your DHAP and G3P will break off and form, in the process of breaking down the glucose glycolysis, it'll form glycerol 3-phosphate and pyruvate. The pyruvate will be then turned into acetyl-CoA, which then can be combined with the acyl-CoA formed from the fatty acids. So acetyl-CoA and acyl-CoA are not the same thing. They'll be combined to form a triglyceride with the glycerol 3-phosphate, which will become kind of the new glycerol backbone. Once these triglycerides are formed, then that's done being stored. So you got to remember, like, these fatty acids are needing to be reformed, basically. And so that's that process right there, is being reformed with the help of glucose. Now, that's the state of lipogenesis, or the production of lipids. What happens in the breakdown of lipids? And so that's our next step, and that is called lipolysis. And there's 2 really important enzymes that I want to talk about. The first one being AP lipase, which is going to break off that first fatty acid, and then hormone sensitive lipase. That's the one the test really likes to mention. hormone-sensitive lipase will break down the rest of them, or they'll go through these FATP transporters and eventually make it through transportation to your liver, muscle, or that's right, your liver, your muscle to get broken down through the bloodstream. So lipolysis. Fun little tidbit fact. Insulin-induced hypoglycemia is just a little interesting case with type 1 diabetics and potentially type 2 diabetics who are taking insulin manually to help because they're either insulin resistant or their pancreas isn't working. Remember, insulin produces these GLUT4 receptors or helps stimulate the production of the GLUT4 receptors. And without insulin, your body can't bring in the glucose. So something interesting is hypoglycemia, the lack of glucose in your bloodstream, can cause you to feel faint, dizzy. My wife is type 1. She feels it all the time. She'll go low. And what's interesting is your body sees the insulin, so then it tells your the portion of your body that is storing or releasing fat in your enterocytes. It's saying, hey, we don't. There's insulin, so we've eaten, so we're fine. But in reality, they haven't eaten, and so all the sugar is moving from your blood to your muscle cells or other cells to be used up. So your blood sugar is dropping, but the insulin, the hormone of insulin, is telling your body not to use fat to counteract that and produce more energy. So you're running out of energy in your blood, which is your blood is the highway of delivering energy to all the parts of your body. But then you're telling your fat cells basically like you don't need to go through lipolysis. So not only you consider you're inhibiting the production of fatty acids to be used as energy, but then you're also dropping their blood sugar, causing problems. So that's the problem with insulin-induced hypoglycemia, is that not only because usually if our blood sugar drops, we can really release glycogen, which I talked about last video, or we can release and break down fats to use for energy sources. Okay, I've got 4 minutes. So let's talk about some of these diseases, and then I should be able to go through the drugs pretty quickly. So some of the diseases, the first one I'm talking about is hypertriglyceridemia. If I say any of these wrongs, I'm sorry. So hypertriglyceridemia is just a lot of triglycerides, and that is because of primarily diet. So you're going to have a lot of VLDL production, which means if you remember, VLDLs have the most amount of triglycerides. It's right after the chylomicron remnant when VLDLs are produced. So you have an excess amount of VLDLs in your bloodstream. This is going to cause something called xanthomas in your hands, palmar xanthomas. Xanthomas are deposits of fat that almost look like welts or blisters, but in these lumps, but it's going to form specifically in your hands. So that's hypertriglyceridemia, and that's I'm going to introduce one really key way to diagnose or just like physical appearance or symptom of said disease. So hypertriglyceridemia, overproduction of VLDLs, palmar xanthomas. The next one is going to be hyperchylomicronemia. Hyperchylomicronemia means too much chylomicrons, and that's because our LPL, our lipoprotein lipase, is not working correctly. Our LPLs, remember, they take the chylomicrons and they turn them in, they take away triglycerides and bring them into the liver where they can be turned into VLDLs. So if we have too much chylomicrons in the bloodstream, that means it's not making it to the liver, right? So there's going to be a problem with our LPL, which are the key way to figure this out is that it's going to have a creamy supernatant, which means if you took their blood, ran it in a thing that spins it and separates everything, you would see this fat layer of fat, this really thick layer of fat that's almost creamy looking in the blood. And that is the excess amount of fats and chylomicrons in the blood. Something I just skipped over. I'm going to butcher this. I should have looked up how to say this beforehand, but it's your apatolipoproteinemia. And this is where what I talked about previously, all the way in the enterocyte. This isn't a adipocyte, by the way. It's a fat cell. I don't know. I keep calling it pterocyte. I wrote pterocyte there. That's wrong. But so your MTPs produce and create ApoB48s, which then bind to the chylomicrons, which help them leave. Without MTPs and ApoB48s, remember, it can't get wrapped up. You can't make that chylomicron, so it can't leave. So the clear case for this is going to be lipid-laden enterocytes, meaning our enterocytes, our small intestine cells, are going to be fat. They're going to be filled with fats because all the fats are entering, but it's not leaving. Okay, our next one is hypercholesterolemia, type 1 and type 2, and hyperlipidemia. So this is just the overconsumption or production of cholesterol and the overproduction or consumption of just lipids in general. And the two key indicators are with hypercholesteremia, you're going to have xanthomas on your fingers. And there's a lot of other symptoms. I'm just giving one key one that's different than the rest. And then the other one is the hyperlipidemia, which you'll see xanthomas actually in your eyes. And that's just deposits of fat. Okay. And then the last one is going to be your dysbeta lipidemia, which I'm also butchering the name, how to say that. And that's where your ApoBs aren't working. Now, if you remember what an ApoB is, it's the receptor ApoE, where it helps bring different things like a chylomicron or a LDL or a IDL back into the liver. So nothing's making it to the liver. So what's happening there is you're going to have Palmer xanthomas as well. Okay, let's talk about drugs in 5 minutes. Okay, so there's a wide variety of drugs that people take that can help with hyperlipidemia and hypertriglyceridemia. The two big boys are fibrates and HMG reductase inhibitors, also known as statins. A lot of people have probably heard of statins. Let's talk about statins first. So statins, actually, remember how we talked about de novo production of cholesterol, making cholesterol from the body? The problem is, if in your diet, if you stop consuming cholesterol and decrease your fat consumption because your doctor tells you to, because you're consuming too much, guess what your body will do? It'll make more, because it'll see that you're not consuming it in your diet and be like, I guess we got to make some new stuff. And so it'll produce the cholesterol. Now, this drug, statins, will decrease the final enzyme step in producing that cholesterol, HMG CoA reductase. By decreasing this, our LDLs are going to go way down because we're going to have way less cholesterol. And so the arrows right here indicating that HDLs are going to go up, LDLs are going down, and our triglycerides are going to stay the same. This can cause hepatotoxicity or toxicity of the liver. And when consumed with niacin or fibrin, it can cause myopathy, which is swelling or growth of the heart. You will also see increases in spikes of cytokine kinase, and this is because cells are erupting. The other big one is fibrates. Fibrates, what they do is they upregulate the expression of lipoprotein lipase through another enzyme that I'm not going to go into, or I probably should. But that's going to upregulate basically the expression of LPL. So if you're upregulating the expression of LPLs, you're upregulating the movement of fats from the blood to the liver. And that's good because we don't want fat in our blood. Okay, or too much fat in our blood, I should say. This will cause cholesterol gallstones, meaning buildup of cholesterol in different portions of your body. And it can also cause a decrease in bile acid synthesis and a couple other issues, which will then eventually cause the cholesterol gallstones. Some other ones that I could go through maybe in another video, including, I can go through them fast. I got a minute. So bile resins, super easy, super fast. Bile resins, what it does is it binds to bile and stops it from working. So if you can't remember, bile was the thing that emulsified the fat in the stomach. So if there's no bile, the fat never gets emulsified, you poop it out. Okay, cholesterol absorption drugs. So the bile resins include colestipol and a couple others that I don't know how to say their names. And then the cholesterol absorption is azatimbe, and azatimbe, what it's going to do is decrease the activity of NPCL1,
channels, which if you remember, that's what brought in the cholesterol. So if this channel is not working, cholesterol is not going to be entering the enterocyte, and you're going to just be excreting that as well. And then the other really important one to remember, we talked already kind of about omega-3s and fish oils. And the other important one to remember is your PCSK9 inhibitors with these weird cube combab kind of like final 4 words, 5 words. And what this will do is it will upregulate the LDL receptors because it'll downregulate the PCSK9 enzyme, which downregulates LPLs. And what this will do is it will decrease your LDL production significantly because your LPLs, which if you remember here, your LPLs are what interact with your LDLs. It will remove a lot of those, and that can cause neurological problems and heart problems and myoglia. So that's my video. It was a little rough for this time. I ran out of time and it was a ton of information, but I hope you enjoyed it and I think it helped me a lot. So thank you.